everyone, welcome back to my channel, Everlynn's Books and Tea. I am so excited to start today's video. I cannot wait to see how this goes. We are doing our March reading game in this video, and I cannot wait to see how this thing goes. So I grew up in a small college town, and our spring break was always set around whenever the college went on spring break, and that was typically in mid-March. So when I was trying to come up with a theme for the March reading game, I felt like the best option was spring break vacation reading game, and I am so excited about how this turned out. I am a little nervous how it's going to go. I think this is the most complicated game I have made yet, but I cannot wait to try it out. Hopefully it does well, and I've made it so that this is one that I could do throughout the year if I wanted to, just taking some brief vacations. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to our game board for our March spring break reading game. So here is our reading game theme board. It's a little bit bigger than our other mid-monthly reading games, but that's because I wanted to put pictures of all the countries on here. It's a little, I'm not sure how well this shows up on camera, but basically we have Europe here, Asia here, Africa, North and South America, Australia, and then the Pacific Islands around here. So, how this game is going to work, bear with me while I explain this, is the first thing we need to do is we need to decide how we are traveling. Are we going by car? Are we going by train or plane? And that is going to come into how quickly we get to our destination point. So each of these tokens is a different type of travel. I'll put them up here somewhere. And basically we have tokens for cars, for trains, and for planes. At the beginning of each vacation, we are going to pull a random token out, and whatever that token is, that is how we are going to travel. Obviously, the fastest way to get to our destination is by plane. So if we go by plane, there are only 5 tokens that we have to get through to get to our destination. Train is going to be the second fastest. We have to go through, I think, like 7 tokens. And then car is going to be the slowest. And we will have to make it through more tokens if we end up going the car route. So that is what we will do first when we start each vacation trip. And each vacation trip is just one time around the board. So we can do multiple vacations on each video. Our second thing we are going to do, let me put this down briefly, is we will be pulling where we are going on our trip. So in here I have the 6 continents that we could travel to. So North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and then Oceania, which is Australia and the Pacific Islands. And then I also have an option for space and other planets, and then a fantasy world option, because, you know, we can't forget our science fiction or fantasy books. And at the beginning of each trip, we will pull out 2 of these, and all the books that we have to read during that specific trip have to be set in one of those 2 places. And then we start the game. And as we play the game, I'll show you how we are going to choose the books. There's a lot of different ways that we are going to do depending on how our dice roll. Like I said, I'm so excited to do this, and I can't wait to see what books we will be reading from, what continents we will be traveling from. I think for this first time, we are going to take 2 trips, and we'll see how that goes. So I guess it's time to start this game. First thing we have to do is see our mode of travel. So in here are all the different tokens. There's 3 of each mode of travel. So I'm going to mix these up in my hand without looking at them. And then we will choose the top one, and that will be our mode of travel. All right, here we go. I might find a different way to do this later, but for now, this is how we are doing it. All right, we'll split the tokens there, and we will be going via a car. So of course we get a car for our first vacation trip, which is the slowest method of travel, which means that we can get a lot of books along this path because we have to pass through 9 different tokens before we get to the end of the board. We are rolling a 6-sided die when we do go around the board, so there is a potential for us to have multiple books on this first trip of our spring break vacation game. But that's okay. The next thing we need to do is see where we are going on our vacation. I think a lot of my March TBR books right now are set in North America. So I'm kind of hoping for North America for one of the options, and then I will take whatever for the second option. I just need to get through some of my March TBR in this game if I have any hopes of completing it in the next 2 weeks. All right, here we go. So our first destination that we can go to is this one right here, and it is Africa. All right, so that is our first option. And then our second option will be, there we go. Oops, there goes one, but we'll go with this one here. And our second option is Space and Other Planets, which I'm pretty sure, I don't think I have any science fiction books on my TBR other than The Dark Forest, which is set in Asia. I don't think I'm going to be reading any books off of my TBR for this first go around. But that's okay. We're going to get introduced to a lot of new books as we journey our way around the world. All right, so let me bring up the game board now, and we'll go ahead and do our first roll of our spring break vacation game. All right, so here is our game board. So let's go ahead and do our first roll. Hopefully we'll get a nice large number like a 5 or a 6. I feel like I always say that though, and we always end up with a 1. But maybe the dice will be with us this game. It's time to find out. A 5. I don't even know what to say. I'm totally stumped. All right, here we go. So we will just be moving wherever a card token is. So that's why I'm jumping over spots. All right, so 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so that's about halfway through the board already. So next up, we will roll a dice again, and this will tell us whether we will be doing a prompt token, a genre spin, or playing a dice roll challenge to choose our book. So I'll show you what each number stands for up here on the screen, and let's go ahead and roll the die. A 3. So that means we'll be spinning the genre wheel and choosing a book that fits that genre. All right, so here is the genre wheel. It has all the genres on it, all the main genres. So let's go ahead and spin it and see what we are going to get. I can't wait to see what genre we'll be reading from. Fantasy may be a little bit more difficult, but I think any of the others will work. Here we go. All right, a historical fiction book. I am super excited about this. It's been a minute since I've read a historical fiction book. We'll probably, obviously, be going for a book set in Africa, a historical fiction book set on a different planet. I don't know if one of those exists, but I can't wait to see what I can find for a historical fiction set in Africa. I've read some really wonderful memoirs that were set in different countries in Africa, but I don't know if I've ever read a true historical fiction book set in Africa. I can't wait to see what options I have, and I'll come back once I choose the book and let you know what book we are going with for this first roll of our spring break vacation game. So I'll see you guys soon. All right, so I have perused all my ebooks and looked through all the historical fiction books that I have to decide what book we will be reading for our first book of this reading challenge. I didn't look through any of my physical books because I usually don't buy historical fiction books in the physical form. I tend to buy them as an ebook because they're not ones that I typically read multiple times. So, looking through the books that I own, I have several that are actually set in Africa in historical times, some of which I've already read, including the Poisonwood Bible. I've also read Cutting for Stone and Harmattan, all of which I enjoyed. I read those all a couple of years ago when I was doing my Around the World challenge, which I've now replaced with this new game that we're playing right now. And there was a couple of books that I have not gotten to yet. The first was the first book in the series by Wilbur Smith, which I believe is called like The River Gods, or that's the first book in the series. And it takes place in ancient Egypt, and that book was over 800 pages long. So I don't feel like that's a good option to start off this reading challenge because that's going to take me especially an 800-page historical fiction book, that's going to take me a little bit of time to read. So I kind of put that book and the rest of a series off to the side, and I went with a little bit of a shorter book, but one that I am super excited to read because it's won several awards, including the American Book Award, as well as been nominated for a Goodreads Choice nominee back in 2017 for historical fiction. And that book is Homegoing by Ya Jossi, and it's actually her debut novel. So this book follows half sisters Effie and Essie, who were born in different villages in 18th century Ghana, and their lives ended up going in completely different ways. Effie ends up marrying an Englishman and moving into basically a castle known as the Cape Coast Castle. Unbeknownst to her, her half-sister Essie is also there, but in the dungeons because she is being sold off as part of the slave trade to the United States. So this book follows these two different threads. The first thread following Effie and her descendants as they live through centuries of war in Ghana, and the second thread following Essie's descendants in America. And from the description, it looks like this book goes from the 18th century all the way into modern time. Despite the book spanning across this large chunk of time, it is on the shorter side. It's only 300 and some pages, so it shouldn't take too long to read, I'm guessing. So I'll probably come back and update you once I have completed the book, let you know my thoughts on it. And yeah, I'm excited to get this challenge started, and I think this is going to be a great book to kick off this challenge. So I will be back soon once I finish this book and update you. So I'll see you guys soon. Bye. All right, so I finished Homegoing and I really enjoyed it, and I can definitely see why this book got nominated for so many awards. So I really enjoyed how this book was written and how the author kind of made it through several generations of people. When I first read the description showing that we were going from, I think it was like the 1800s all the way up to modern time in 300 pages, I wasn't sure how the author was going to go about doing that, because in a lot of historical fiction books, that chunk of time would take like 600, 700 pages, and this author was going to do it in 300 pages. So I wasn't sure how she's going to do that, but I really enjoy the way that she went about skipping over this huge amount of time in such a short amount of pages. So the book starts out following two half-sisters, Afia and Essie, who are both born in Ghana, and then their lives take very different trajectories. Afia ends up marrying a man, a British man, an English man, who is living at the Gold Coast Castle, which is in Ghana, and she ends up on a very different pathway than her sister, half-sister, who she never met, who ends up as part of the slave trade and is shipped off to the United States. Each chapter of the book then follows a subsequent generation of these two families. So each generation is told by a son or a daughter of the previous generation. And you kind of see what happens to Essie's family in the United States and to Effia's family, who remains in Ghana, and kind of how their different lives kind of play out over several hundred years. The chapters for each person are fairly short, and you only really get to see kind of like a glimpse of their entire lives. Some of the chapters focus on when they're adults. Some of the chapters focus on when they're younger. So while each chapter focuses on a very specific time point in each person's life, there are a lot of reminiscence about what's happened in the past. So you get to learn not only what happened in that person's childhood, but sometimes you learn a little bit more about their parents, their grandparents, and through this, the families throughout the generations, their lives kind of unfold. So because of the way that the author wrote it, it made for a very fast-paced historical fiction book, which is not typically the case. I feel like a lot of historical fiction books are very slow-paced, just the way they are written, because you're either following one person through the span of their lifetime, or in books that follow generations of families, you're following like one person for 200, 300 pages before moving on to the next generation. And in this book, you're following one generation for maybe 30 pages at the most. So it made for a fast-paced book, and I was always looking forward to see what which person the author chose as the main character in that next generation. So definitely recommend reading this book. It definitely talked about some very serious topics, and there was definitely some things that were uncomfortable to read. So if there are triggers that you have, this is definitely a book to look up the trigger warnings, but definitely worth a read. And like I said, it really, the way the author wrote it, it really made it easy to read and easy to get through. So that was Homegoing by Ya Jotzi. And now we have to go ahead and choose our second book of this game. So let's go ahead and bring up the game board and roll our dice. All right, so here is our game board once again. We are right here. There are 4 more spots before we reach the finish line. So let's see what we get for our second roll of the game. All right, a 2. So not moving too far forward right here. So again, we will be rolling for either a prompt token, a genre token, or the dice roll challenge. So let's see how we'll be choosing our second book. Here we go. 4. So we'll be doing another genre spin and choosing our book that way. Let me bring up the genre wheel. All right, so here is our genre wheel again. Last time we obviously got historical fiction. So let's see what we get this second time around. I'm not sure what genre I want this time around. I'm hoping for something different than historical fiction since we already did that. So here we go. Let's see what we get. All right, nonfiction. I forgot that was even an option on here, or else I probably would have said I'm hoping not to get a nonfiction book. But that is where we are. Hopefully I can find a nice short nonfiction book that we can get read pretty quickly. Again, it either has to take place in Africa or space. So I guess it could be a nonfiction book about other planets. This could be interesting to figure out what we are going to read. So let me go run through some options, and then I will be back and let you know what option we're going to go with for this nonfiction genre. So we didn't move too far forward on the board with this second roll. We only got a 2. We ended up having to do another genre spin, and this time we got nonfiction, which was probably the genre I wanted the least out of all the ones that were on our wheel, but we had to make do with that. So we are going to have to go find a nonfiction book that is either set in Africa or about space or other planets. So let me go see what I already own, and I will be back and let you know what books I'm thinking about choosing. All right, so we have a couple of options. The nonfiction books that are set in Africa that I own, I've actually already read. So one of those books was What is the What by Dave Eggers, which was a memoir. He was one of the Lost Boys of, I believe it was the Sudan, and it kind of takes us through his childhood up into his adulthood where he ended up in the United States. So that was definitely an interesting read, but I already read that one. And the other book that I already read that I own was The House at Sugar Beach, which is by Helene Cooper, set in Liberia, and it's another memoir that follows the life of the author Helene Cooper as she grew up in Liberia up until the time that she immigrated to the United States. And it was also a very interesting read, and I highly recommend this book as well. But that kind of ruled out choosing a nonfiction book set in Africa, as I already read the 2 books that I own that were nonfiction. So I went ahead and kind of looked through the space books, nonfiction books I have, which I also don't own too many of. I just don't own a lot of nonfiction books to begin with. But the 2 options that we had are Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson and A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. And the way I ended up choosing which book I was going to go with is I chose whichever one was shorter, which happened to be Astrophysics. Oh my God, I can't even say it. Which happens to be Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. So that is a book we will be reading for our second book of this game. Had no idea when I started this spring break vacation game that this is where we are going to be ending up. So I will get back to you after I've completed this book. It does look like a short book, so hopefully it won't take me too long to get back. So I'll see you guys soon. All right, so this book was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. It says that it was like 200 and some pages long, but I read it on my Kindle, and every time I swiped to the next page, it was skipping like 2 pages. It was going from like 5 to 7 to 9 to 11, which made it a much quicker read than I thought it was going to be. So this book ended up being a collection of essays on astrophysics and space that were written by Neil deGrasse Tyson and then published together in a book. It was definitely... it's hard to review nonfiction books, I feel. I definitely enjoyed reading it. I did learn some things. It really went into a lot of science. We learned, again, about neutrinos, positrons, quarks, and a lot of other small things. We learned about how the different elements are found in space, like helium and oxygen, and some of the heavier elements and radioactive elements. We learn how the galaxy is expanding, and we learn how the galaxy came to be. So yeah, it's definitely a book that if you're interested in getting started on astrophysics, I feel like it's a good place to start. I don't have a background in astrophysics. My major back in college was biomedical engineering, so I did take several physics courses, but I don't think you needed those to read this book. And I think it was just a nice kind of introduction to astrophysics and what astrophysicists do. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say. That was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And let's bring up the game board and go ahead and roll our, hopefully, last roll of this trip number 1. All right, on to our third roll, hopefully our final roll of trip 1. And we got a 5, which means we make it to the finish line. So since these games are short, like I said before, we are going to choose a book for the final roll. So let's go ahead and first roll the dice to see what type of prompt we'll be doing. All right, so hopefully we will get something other than the genre spin for this last book on this trip. All right, here we go. Let's see what we are doing. All right, we got a 6, and that means we'll be doing the dice roll challenge, which is probably the most complicated challenge I have come up with, but it's going to involve, obviously, rolling a dice. Up on the side, I'm going to put what each number stands for. We'll be rolling a 8-sided dice, and this first roll will determine which of these 8 categories we will be using to choose our next book. So here we go. All right, a 7. So a 7 is the alphabet category. Again, I'll put up on the screen here what each number 1 through 8 is going to stand for within this category. You can see we could be doing something with the title starts with a letter, the author's first name starts with a letter, etc., all the way down the list. All right, let's go ahead and roll the dice and see how we'll be choosing our last book for this first trip of the spring break vacation game. All right, so it's a 3. So we'll be doing author's last name must start with the letter that we spin for on our alphabet wheel. So let's pull that up and do the final spin for this last roll of this trip. All right, here's the alphabet wheel. I am not sure why it is not showing the letters on the wheel, but they are there, believe me. It's just being a little funny. We are going to try to spin this wheel and see if it works. It does. All right, here we go. All right, hopefully we get a good letter, which we do. We get a R. I'm sure there are a million books that are either set in space on another planet or in Africa by an author whose last name starts with R. So let me go do my research, and I will get back to you and let you know what the final book of Trip 1 is going to be. I'm so excited. I cannot wait. I'll be back soon. All right, so for our last roll, we got a 5, which means we made it all the way to the end of the board. On this game, we will be choosing a book when we reach the end, just because otherwise you could end up with 0 books, depending on if you're flying by plane. And since these trips are pretty short, I decided before I even started this game that on the finish token, we will be choosing a book. So that is why we went ahead and rolled for our next book, and we ended up getting a dice roll challenge, which was quite fun. And we ended up with having to choose a book with an author's last name that started with a R. So I have one more criteria I added to this, just to make it a little bit harder. And because I need to read a book that has a pink cover on it by the end of this month as my book color cover challenge. And none of my books on my TBR have pink on it, which is the color for the month of March. So I added that this book also had to have a pink cover, so I could check off that mark. And that I made that 10 times more difficult on myself when I added that, because how do you look for a book with a pink color that's either set in Africa, space, or an alternate planet with a author's last name that starts with R? Not something that you can easily Google ChatGPT. I didn't really try ChatGPT. Maybe that would have helped, but it made it a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to. So after a lot of searching, I found a method that seemed to work, and that is I pulled up the Goodreads list for books set in Africa, books set in space or on other planets, which were basically science fiction. And I initially just scrolled through looking for books that had pink covers, but then I realized, you know what? I should be looking for authors that start with the last name R, because then I can, open up the author and pull up their entire book list and see if any of those books had a pink color. So that is what I ended up doing after wasting probably about 7 minutes of my time. And after another 5 minutes, I found a book that met all my criteria. It is a science fiction book, a dystopian book that is set on what seems to be a different planet. It is written by Victoria Rossi, so last name starts with R, and it has a pink cover. So the book we will be reading for this last roll of trip 1 is Under the Never Sky, which is the first book in her Under the Never Sky series, and it's by Veronica Rossi. And it actually, I can't remember if it won the award, but it was at least nominated for the Goodreads Choice Award, I think back in 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. So that will be our last book for this first trip. So I am going to go start reading it, and I will be back once I have completed this book. Oh, I should probably tell you what this is about. So Under the Never Sky follows two characters, Arya and Perry, and they are living separate lives. Arya is growing up in what seems to be this pod system. I'm not really sure what it's about. And somehow she manages to get kicked out of the pod system into the outside world. And in the outside world, she meets Perry, who is also looking for something. And she ends up having to trust Perry because she can't survive in this outside world without him. So it seems to be like a dystopian, maybe a little romance there. We'll see. I'll come back to you once I finish this book and let you know. All right, Under the Night Sky. I have completed it. I give it, I would say probably around a 4 out of 5. The first half of the book was very hard to get into. There wasn't a lot of stuff going on other than the two main characters kind of arguing back and forth. And it was just very hard to stay engaged with. Once we reached about the 50% point, things really kind of took off, and there's more action, more things happening, and more characters introduced, and that's when I felt myself becoming engaged with the story and really enjoying that last 50%. So this book follows two characters, Arya and Perry, and the author kind of goes between the two viewpoints as you go through the book, with some chapters focus on Arya's viewpoint, some chapters focused on Perry's viewpoint. So Arya comes from kind of like the elite people on this planet, which I think ends up being a dystopian Earth. But she comes from this from kind of where all the elite people live in these pods, and these pods, and the people who live in these pods have something called, I forget what the exact name is, but something called like the eye. And basically it's this technological device that fits over their eye and allows them to surf basically the internet, a very advanced internet. And that is where all the people who live in the pods kind of live their day. So the advanced internet has things called the realms, where they can go visit with their friends, and each realm is different. You can go to like a medieval realm and hang out and do kind of like medieval things. You can go to a futuristic realm, hang out there. There's realms where you can sing opera, or realms that you can, I don't know, go swimming. So basically a realm for anything that you want to do. And the people who live in these pods, that is where they spend pretty much their entire time from morning into night. And that is where Arya has grown up. Now, Perry has grown up in the outside, and on the outside there are these ether storms, where the sky just makes these violent storms of ether, which can cause like tornadoes and lightning. So it's a very dangerous place to live. And the people who are surviving on the outside are separated into these different tribes who sometimes need to do battle. But basically, that is where people on the outside are living within their tribes. And people are hunters. Each tribe is ruled by what's called a blood lord. And the people that are not royalty, but kind of like the higher up, the blood lords, their family, have these special powers where they have kind of heightened senses. So they can have a heightened sense of smell that allows them to smell people's feelings, people's tempers. They can have a heightened sense of seeing, where they can like see things far away, heightened sense of hearing, where they can hear people far away or hear people who are speaking low. And the people that have these heightened senses are kind of ones that rule the tribe. Now, Arya gets herself into trouble. So her mom ends up having to go to a different pod. The ones that Arya lives on is called like Reverie, and her mom has to go to the Bliss pod Bliss, and she doesn't know why. Whatever her mom does is kind of like top secret, and she can't tell Arya what she does, other than she's a genetic scientist. And then at one point, after her mom goes to Bliss, Arya can no longer, the communication with Bliss gets shut off, and Arya doesn't know why. She can no longer contact her mother, and she wants to figure out what's going on. So she tries this trick to get the child of kind of like the president of the pod alone to see if he has any information, and that kind of backfires on her. And before she knows it, she's kicked out of the pods, and now she's outside. And there she ends up running into Perry, and the two of them need something from each other. Perry needs to get back his nephew who was taken by the people of the pods, and Arya needs Perry's help to just survive on the outside, basically, and hopefully find information about what happened to Bliss and what happened to her mother. And that's kind of where the story goes. It evolves from there. Like I said, the first 50% of the book are Perry and Arya just kind of arguing, like, she calls him an outsider, a savage. He calls her a mole person, pod person. And it takes them a while to trust each other. And it takes like literally 50% of the book for that to happen, which is why the first half of the book is so slow. But like I said, once we got to that second half of the book, things started going. And the plot really picked up. The characters really picked up. And I ended up enjoying it by the end. This is the first book of the series, so I think I will check out the other books at some point, especially if they kind of continue off with the way the second half of this book did. So yeah, so that is Under the Never Sky by Veronica Rossi, and that is the last book of our first trip. The next time you see this board, I will be coloring in the country of Ghana, since we have read a book from Ghana. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to use color pencils or marker, which is why I haven't colored it in yet. But once I make that decision, we will start coloring in each country as we visit it. Now, I know I did say I was going to do 2 rolls of this, or 2 trips of this game, and I've only done 1 so far. I think I'm going to stop this video here and then save the second trip for a second video that I'll post in April, because otherwise this video is never going to go up. So I think that's all for this video for trip 1 of our spring break vacation game. I had so much fun doing this, and I think this is something we can kind of bring back throughout the months, because we can do some quick trips, you know, when we have time. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and enjoyed learning about some books that you may not otherwise have. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. And if you want to see future videos by me, including part 2 of this video, please hit the subscribe button. And yes, I'll see you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching again. Bye!